All right. Check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey now. Should be coming through here pretty good. Welcome everybody in. Tonight is the night. It is 8 p.m. and it is time to start September 24th, 1991, the day that changed music forever. Obviously, what I'm referencing in that is this album right here. Nirvana Nevermind was released on this day in 1991. Now, what we're going to do on this stream tonight is we got some guests, and we want to talk to you guys too. So you're able to go on Twitter, and you can actually join the spaces on there, and I'll eventually get to everybody and click on everybody for comments. And you can also go on YouTube if you're on here, obviously live right now. I will take chat questions there as well, comments, whatever the case may be. The more interactive, the better. We want to hear from you guys. So, but basically, I just wanted to start off with saying uh, the whole reason this thing started was the other night I was watching on Paramount Plus the new Nothing But a Good Time 3-part series about the rise and fall of hair metal, and it was really good, produced by MTV. And that the last episode really got me thinking about all this and how just everything changed and everything. You know, we're gonna show you tonight how hair metal was at the top one day and literally gone the next day. Is that Paramount Plus um, documentary will show you. The other cool thing that helps out with this documentary as well is after I was done watching that 3 hours of whatever it was of Nothing But a Good Time, then they went into the Lollapalooza documentary of the whole creation and every year of Lollapalooza and going through all the bands that played that. And that also will play a part into this stream as well. So, want to get going here. Watch this now. I'm going to put these on. These are the 1970s Sansui headphones. This way I cannot miss anybody. I will hear everybody, hopefully. And we'll get started here. I got a whole page of notes here. I got everything ready to go. Like I said, we want to hear from you guys. I'm going to get to all the chats. I got my screen here where I'm going to be ready to get anybody that wants to join in via the spaces on Twitter. So make sure you go to that as well. And but before we get on to all you guys, I just want to set the table here and get everything going. I want to bring in my guest for this. Let's add him to the stage here. He is literally my brother from the same mother. uh, Dr. James Bucciolato is here with me tonight. I'm going to tell you on a second. But for this show tonight, he comes to us. He's a founding member of the Original Gangsters podcast. He's here with me tonight because he knows much more and about music than I do in this case. So I'm going to bring him on. And tonight we will refer to him as the fucking doc.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great. How about me?
Okay. Yeah, perfect.
All right, I think we're all good here. All right, so like I said, what we'll do is hopefully my son and you will remind me. I'll check the comments as they come in here. Any questions, any comments, and then we got the Twitter thing going on as well, where people can actually come in and talk to us. Make sure you request to be let into the round table, and I will let you guys in there. Um, so let's get started here. So what I did basically is I wrote down a bunch of stuff all last night and today. I sat and wrote down questions that I would ask you, being someone that um, was in the prime years when this whole thing was starting, when grunge came, to prominence. I was only 11 years old of September 24th of 1991. I think you would have been what, 16?
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's prime time for music. There's no bigger fan of music at the age of 16 years old, right? So
Yeah.
this album comes out. Um, Not sure how big it is on the first day of its release, but it doesn't take long, right, for it to like blow up. And now, uh, watching the Nothing But a Good Time documentary on Paramount Plus, and then the Lollapalooza documentary on Paramount Plus as well. a lot of people say that maybe too much credit is given to Nirvana Nevermind for ushering in this whole grunge movement, being that that summer before September, that whole summer was the first Lollapalooza festival where you had Jane's Addiction and Living Color and Rollins Band and all that stuff going on. Do you remember that tour? Because it did come here. Did you remember that being and also another cool thing on that was, and this was way before the album came out, was Ice-T's Body Count. Um, but we'll get to that in a second, but just Lollapalooza itself, was that even something you were even interested in, or was that way off your map?
No, I remember. I mean, there was definitely an emerging alternative scene, um, but I don't think it was like commercially huge yet until Nirvana came out. But you know, people knew about Living Color, Nine Inch Nails, Jane's Addiction, groups like that. But so yeah, maybe there's a point that Nirvana gets too much credit, but I mean, I would say commercially, it's Nirvana that's who like blows the whole thing up in terms of where it's not really considered alternative anymore. It's like that becomes mainstream rock music.
Right. So just so everybody knows, if you're having trouble hearing on the Twitter Spaces, you can still talk to us on that. So I will let you in the room eventually on that. But if you want to go to the YouTube, you can do both. So you can go to the YouTube live stream, see us on video, but also keep your Twitter open as we'll bring everybody in to talk here in a few minutes. Um, so the funny thing is about Nirvana Nevermind, and I only want to talk briefly about the album because there's a lot of other stuff that I think is more important of that era and what happened because of that album. But the funny thing about Nirvana Nevermind is I think it at its peak, you and I never bought it.
No, no.
And I'm assuming the reason why that is because you couldn't turn around without it being in your face, right? I mean, it was all over the radio, it was all over MTV. It was, why would you have to go buy it? It was, you know,
It really wasn't my scene. I liked it. I knew it was different. It definitely had a punk influence,
right.
I
So,
liked
so,
it, but it really wasn't my thing.
so let me ask you that though. But was it more your thing than what was popular at the time, being Warrant, Skid Row, Firehouse? Uh, was it more your cup of tea than that would have been if you had to make a purchase?
Yeah, it was definitely I liked Nirvana more than I liked that. So in a way, for a guy, I mean, you could tell by the T-shirt I'm wearing. Like for a guy like me, it was just like, okay, there was one dominant genre of rock, hair metal, that I wasn't listening to, and then it moved to grunge, which I wasn't listening to because either way it wasn't Slayer. You know what I mean? Either way it was I was listening to Sepultura and stuff like that. So um it just shifted. The program directors at the rock stations just shifted from Bon Jovi and Poison to Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and either way I wasn't really hip to it. But if I had to pick, Nirvana was more of what I was into than Poison or Bon Jovi.
Right. So if you look at what was going on right before the release of Nevermind, I looked last night. I looked at the cover of Metal Edge magazine from the month before Nevermind came out, and the cover of Metal Edge magazine featured Nelson, Skid Row, Poison, Warren, Slaughter, Firehouse. And that was the peak of hair metal where all the guys are dressed up and still wearing kind of the glam stuff, but it's getting even though grunge, they're not those bands haven't adapted to grunge yet, but I think the glam thing is toning down and they're getting not as like kind of girly looking, right? But anyway, that Nevermind comes out and a lot of these bands don't survive, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Um, but just to know what's going on at the time before that album comes out in June of '91, you have Van Halen releases For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge in June of '91. Um, Now at that point with that band, are you that's not even on your radar, or is it? I mean, you're hearing it on the radio? You're hearing the video, you're seeing the videos and whatnot.
Well, I don't think Van Halen. I think was one of those bands that kind of transcended the trends. Like so Van Halen, AC/DC, I would say Ozzy. There were like these OG bands that, I mean, I know Ozzy like flirted with that aesthetic for a while, like Shot in the Dark era, but I still think Ozzy, AC/DC, Van Halen were, maybe Def Leppard you put in there, were like bigger than any particular genre. So um I didn't really see that the alternative scene would stop anyone from buying Van Halen records. Like mainstream radio, they were still playing Van Halen, they were showing their videos on MTV. There were a few bands that still were able to survive, Aerosmith maybe. It was really more of those bands you're talking about, Nelson, Winger,
Didn't
those
stand a
bands were the ones,
chance, right?
right?
Yeah.
Those bands were wiped out.
Now, also, so that's June of '91. July of 1991, we see the soundtrack to Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which has Kiss on there, who has a radio hit with "God Gave Rock and Roll to You." Also, Megadeth appears on that. Some other bands, I don't remember who, but some heavier bands are on that. But just to show you the climate of of the summer of '91, the biggest things around, um, other than the hair metal stuff, is Color Me Bad comes out with their self-titled album. Will Smith, called The Fresh Prince at the time, has the song Summertime is out. Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch is out. So that's what's going on in the pop world and on MTV and so on and so forth. Um,
A lot of bad music.
yes, that's the point. So I think there was a definite hole there. There was a space there for Nirvana to really punch through because it was paper mache. You know what I mean? They didn't have to fight very hard. Um, Now August of '91 sees Metallica's Black Album come out, which is a huge departure from them, but also a big hit. And some can argue whether or not that was the right move or the best move, or that took them where they needed to go, definitely. And then the same time, right, really at the same time as Metallica's Black Album, is Pearl Jam's first album, 10, is released before Nirvana Nevermind. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, I think people knew about Pearl Jam more after Nirvana broke through, even though technically the chronology is out of order. But yeah, I remember, hearing about them, but again, it didn't speak to me. At least Nirvana was, some of their stuff was heavier, like, and
Right.
had kind of a punk,
Punk,
you, kn- you
yeah.
right, and they were influenced by like the Melvins and like, stuff that I would have listened to back then. I was a big Alice in Chains fan from the first. I mean, the first time I ever heard them, I was a huge Alice in Chains fan. So at least Nirvana was a little bit on that wavelength. Pearl Jam for me, just as a metalhead, was a little bit, or they just weren't aggressive enough for me. But
Now you
but I
have
was I knew who they were.
Now speaking of Alice in Chains, they had, now you're talking Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. You're talking as early as 1989, 1990 that they're coming out. So they're a little before, but a little different. Maybe still straddling that heavy metal and very acceptable from the metal audience.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember. As far as I can recall, metalheads embraced Alice in Chains from the beginning, but I know I've read things online or in magazines where Alice in Chains talk about how when they open up Clash of the Titans, that they would get booed off the stage, and I, I I don't remember that. I mean, I was at that show in Detroit, and like everyone was into Alice in Chains. I mean, all the metalheads were really into them, and I think a lot of metalheads like Soundgarden too. So I don't remember that like division. I mean, if Alice in Chains said that happens, I'm sure it did in certain venues, but not where I was at. Everyone, all the metalheads seemed to really dig Alice in Chains.
Here's some comments coming in for sure. Around that time, 91, Anthrax, Public Enemy come out with Bring the Noise. Around the same time as Nevermind is coming out. I think Attack of the Killer Bees album from Anthrax is coming out. And obviously, uh, Anthrax with Public Enemy, and also you have with Lollapalooza, you have Living Color on the bill of that, which is directly influencing Tom Morello and Rage Against the Machine. That's going to come later on in that. So that's where you get that influence there. Here's another comment from Ed here saying, the 90s, the beginning of the lost decade for Metallica. And we will have a minute to get into that later too. But
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
you mentioned Metallica. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into it, but I mean, I was one of the guys who stood in line, to get when the Black Album came out.
I was there with you. Yeah, I remember.
And honestly, it's interesting over time. I like Nevermind and the Black Album more today than I did in I
Yeah.
did in
And you know what
1991.
my theory is on that? Is that since then, so much shit music has come out, especially in the last 15 years, 10 years, that of course you're gonna like those albums more because you're not getting offered anything in the last long time. So you know what I mean? Of course, yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I definitely have a more of a respect for those albums, even if it's Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion, or yeah, or Van Halen, or Bon Jovi's Keep the Faith, or any of those albums that came out in 91, 92. Of course, I mean they're way better than we remembered at the time. I think. Um, so just to go on this timeline too, is that so? Nevermind comes out September 24th, which is today, the anniversary. But also, also right around there, you have uh, Motley Crue. Right that same week comes out with their greatest hits, Decade of Decadence. And I think, I'm going to get to that in a minute. I have a list here to read to you of, um, you know, based on Nirvana's success, who were survivors, followers, and who were just plain dead. Okay. So Motley Crue comes out with Decade of Decadence on peak of the MTV. Vince Neil's still with them. They have a song, an awesome video on that called Primal Scream. Pretty heavy stuff. Um, and I think that they, could have remained a survivor, but they kind of self imploded. Had nothing to do with Nirvana, but
Oh,
we
I
can get
think they
into
were. I
that.
mean, I would put Motley Crue in that category of Van Halen, Ozzy, Aerosmith, like AC/DC bands that I think were it wasn't about like whether you were grunge or hair metal or what. There were just these like blue chip hard rock bands that that I think they were survivors.
Yeah, definitely. I wrote down here the ones definitely I think that couldn't be touched no matter what was happening were Rolling Stones or a Pink Floyd, or even though they weren't to get like a Led Zeppelin, their record sales, nothing, those are kind of like name brands, right? Now again with Motley Crue coming out with the greatest hits at that point, 10 years on, also right around the time of Nevermind coming out, Ratt puts out their greatest hits album, which is kind of that's the nail in the coffin, right? That's it for them, right?
Yeah,
Um,
they weren't able to they got swept up in that like Winger, Warrant, Poison.
yeah.
And I know Poison ended up like coming back and they're actually pretty
Well,
popular now, but
everybody did, yeah.
yeah, but Rat at the time was not one of the survivors. They got swept up in the that this is whack, glam metal or hair metal is or cock rock, whatever that is whack. And so they weren't survivors at all.
Um, So now the other one here, I see less than a month after Nevermind comes out, or no, actually the same month that comes out. Also, you have Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, which is the complete antithesis of Nirvana Nevermind. It's a 2 album set, very self indulgent, very egotistical. Everything that Nevermind and Nirvana are not. It's a complete, total different thing where Nevermind and Nirvana is anti-establishment, uh, anti um, sexism. You know what I mean? So a lot of those hair metal bands fell into that, where it's all like the naked chicks in the videos and stuff like that. Nirvana, that was over. and the clothes was over, and that whole image was gone. Now I have respect for Guns N' Roses because they never really bought into. I mean, they had their own, always had their own style, always had their own look. But I wonder if that grunge scene coming in was a left hook to them that maybe they probably would have stayed bigger for a lot longer. But
No, I think
those
I
things
think
are changing.
they were pretty big. I mean, I believe some people can fact check us on this, but I believe Nirvana was offered the opening slot for Guns N' Roses and Metallica tour, and I think Nirvana turned it down
Yes.
because they didn't want to be associated with like corporate rock, like Guns N' Roses, this kind of macho, like you're
Yeah.
talking about. But Guns N' Roses was huge. I mean, I remember like a lot of metalheads were into them too. Even like dudes that were into heavier stuff. I was never a huge GNR fan, but I mean, I liked some of their stuff. But I remember Guns N' Roses was one of those bands that like a lot of like hair metal guys liked Guns N' Roses, but like a lot of metal dudes liked Guns N' Roses too. And then plus obviously a lot of just mainstream FM radio rock fans liked them. I mean, I think they were pretty huge. I mean, they're another band I think that sort of transcended. I think
Everything. Right.
they were untouchable. I think at that point.
Um, Definitely. I think people could I think true metal fans could see that like no bullshit attitude of theirs, and that that like kind of we don't give a F thing, and that was the appeal for more hardcore metal fans, that they were able to respect it, but maybe they didn't like all the music. But so now the last one I wanted to point out was, and this will get us into the next topic here, is also right around the exact same time of Use Your Illusions, Black Album, Nevermind, Ozzy No More Tears comes out, and that's sort of a revival for him. I did a comeback albums recently, and I put No More Tears in there as a real comeback effort from him, and that album makes him a survivor, I believe, of the grunge movement. So, and then I want you to add this. So, what I want to get to now is the list I have of just it was just off the top of my head of survivors of grunge, followers of grunge, and then didn't stand a chance, we're dead. Okay, so um obviously, yeah, Ozzy Osbourne puts out No More Tears. He's able to survive the whole thing. Interestingly enough, very weird, and I still never got the answer on this. I don't know if you ever were able to find any information on this, but on the back of the album says inspiration and musical direction Mike Inez, who was in Alice in Chains.
I don't think he was in Alice in Chains at that point. He
Yeah, I
was in
think
Ozzy
yeah,
at
you're right.
first.
Yeah. So, but I just wonder. I mean, that's a pretty big title to give a guy, and then he,
I,
I
yeah, I
guess he
don't.
must have had some
I
say.
mean, somebody can fact check us on it, but I believe that Bob Daisley was the one who played bass on that whole record.
Yeah.
I think Mike Inez became an official member when they were probably still editing the record, so he got like he got some cred there for whatever. But in terms of playing, I don't know if he's actually on any of those songs. I mean, someone would have to look that up. But back then, I recall thinking that Bob Daisley played everything and Michael Inez just came in at the end.
Yeah, I don't know. That's always been a mystery to me. I never got it. So in the survivors category, I'm gonna put Bon Jovi in there because John Bon Jovi made the right decision at that time. He was at a crossroads. He could have stayed in the hair metal path, or he could have done what he did, which was the smart move, was to go more like kind of mainstream rock, where he's kind of aligning himself with like Brian Adams or I don't know. Um, Bruce Springsteen or something. You know what I mean? Like he made the decision to get away from that, and that was smart. And then he was even smarter in the fact that after that album, Keep the Faith, the next 3 years completely stayed off the map in the United States. If you read about it, Bon Jovi disappeared, didn't come back till 1995. I think he was smart enough to stay away from the US market, knowing that grunge was so huge in 93, 94, 95.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that Bon Jovi, like my cat's in the camera here. That Bon Jovi was someone that his first couple of albums, or maybe three, he was considered like hair metal, but a lot of us who, like you and I, who are really into rock and stuff, we kind of knew he wasn't even really hair metal to begin with. I mean, maybe aesthetically, in terms of optics, they kind of look like that, the big hairspray and stuff. But musically, I always felt like they were just a rock band. And so I think that was easy for them to make that transition of like, we're not even really like sonically part of this scene anyhow, like other than like big hairspray, like we're not really, we don't really
Yeah.
sound like Poison or Motley Crue anyhow. So
No, because I think a band like Bon Jovi, where you have Richie Sambora and John Bon Jovi, are actual legitimate songwriters. And I think they always cared about that, and it wasn't about just writing songs about girls and I mean they had that, but they tried legitimately to write catchy, really good songs. Um, Now this you could agree or just where do you put this? Is Metallica is Metallica a survivor? Is Metallica a survivor of grunge or a follower of grunge?
Metallica,
Yeah.
oh, I mean, they were like Guns N' Roses. I mean, they were just bigger than anything, I mean,
Nothing was going to stop them no matter what other thing was coming out.
yeah, I mean, I think they were just a juggernaut like Guns N' Roses. They were just huge, you know.
But at that time though, wasn't it still perceived that sort of I mean, not till you went to see them live is where they really paid it off and but wasn't it seem that like Metallica was always sort of maybe more of a little brother? It took a while, right? Where Guns N' Roses was still a little more um
Well, I think Guns N' Roses on that.
I think if they would have pushed the issue, they probably would have headlined that co-headline tour.
I was just gonna say that co-headlining tour, I believe Guns N' Roses played last. So even though it was technically co-headlining,
Right,
I
right,
mean,
right. Yeah,
I mean
that's
they
right.
GNR still had more mainstream appeal because even though Metallica was huge, I mean, like Guns N' Roses had songs like November Rain and stuff that just weren't like like that. Like Metallica didn't have anything at that point that could compete on that level. So I guess you could say little brother in a way, but then Metallica just surpassed everybody. But
Yeah.
at that point, maybe you're right.
Also, I would have to say just because they never strayed and they stuck to the meat and potatoes stuff was I think AC/DC is a survivor of grunge. They were able to get through it without having to follow trends or anything like that.
They
Um,
probably didn't even know that that any of it was happening.
Good. Thank God for that.
They were
Um,
probably like above the
now,
fray.
now they did try some. I mean, some of the albums, but I think maybe they were trying to follow Metallica more than grunge. I think Megadeth. Was able to survive grunge and that they were still able to sell out tours and have hit albums and for quite a while. There was a little dip there
I would say
in
that they
the late
were,
90s.
but that's because Countdown to Extinction came out and they had some hits on there because this is one of the things that I don't know if you want to talk about, but we talk about grunge killing hair metal. But as far as the music industry was concerned and radio stations, they lumped a lot of the heavier stuff that I was listening to, they lumped it into the same category. So like Anthrax, Testament, Overkill, like Exodus,
Yeah.
bands like that were also considered like this is passe. Like we're not interested in this. This is all hair. It's all just guys with long hair and nobody likes it anymore. So Megadeth probably, I mean, that didn't really touch Metallica, but even Slayer, bands like that, like they had a tough road during this time. Megadeth, I mean, because of Countdown to Extinction, that was a pretty big record. Um, I mean, I saw them. Maybe you were with me. I don't remember. They headlined Pine Knob here in Detroit around that time, and
Hmm.
that was a major venue. So Megadeth was lucky that they had some hits. But if you were a band like Slayer, Testament, Sepultura, bands like that without any so-called hits, you kind of got lumped into all this like hair metal. Like we're not playing it on the radio, we're not playing it on MTV anymore. So it was a tough time for anybody considered metal, regardless of what kind of brand of metal you were.
Well, yeah, and that'll get me to that dead category in a second. So just to finish the survivor, we talked about. I feel that Van Halen was a survivor of grunge. I think well, I mean, years before they had already made the decision to stray away from hair metal and got more just mainstream, kind of like adult contemporary arena rock, I guess. Um, and I also think that it came out, and this is just because I'm a fan of Bring. This is selfish, but like days within Nirvana Nevermind coming out, Rush releases the album Roll the Bones, and I think they were able to kind of. I mean, they were never really that big anyway to get sort of the feet knocked out of them, but they were able to survive as well. Um, Now, followers in the followers category, I put bands in that adjusted their sound and not be themselves, but try to follow Nirvana and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. Uh, I definitely would put Motley Crue in that with the 1994 album, even though I love it a lot. And that's one of those ones we talk about where now, if you listen to it now, it's head and shoulders above just tons of other stuff that came out around that time. It just didn't get a chance, you know. Um, Skid Row, I think, is a band that suffered and tried to with that album Subhuman Race. They tried to be like a lot heavier, but the album before it, Slave to the Grind, was heavier, and they did get respect. I mean, I guess they were always respected, and I guess it was another band that was just their own downfall and their own doing that they couldn't get to get. They couldn't, get along. But
Well, I mean, that third record didn't do as well, and then I guess it's a chicken or the egg thing, but that record didn't do so well, and then then pretty much people were like, oh well, it's like hair metal, so what's the difference? So I would say Skid Row, yeah, they failed. I mean, I would say, you know.
I mean, not so much with the sound of white noise, but I think maybe after Anthrax might have tried, maybe they strayed a little too far from what they were supposed to be doing, and that hurt them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think they got lumped into the whole like metal isn't working. It has to be grunge. It has to be alternative. I personally, I love the John Bush records. I like this may be controversial, but I think John Bush is the best singer that Metallica or Anthrax ever had. And I love Belladonna too. Don't get me wrong, but I actually think John Bush is that he's my favorite singer. I really love those records that he did with Anthrax. I think good for them that they tried to evolve and sound different. I really enjoyed those records and I still do. But they definitely. I mean, I think after was it Stomp? What was the second one they did with John Bush? Stomp 40.
422, 4
For,
2.
yeah. I'm embarrassed. I was just saying I love those records. I can't remember the name of it, but I'm pretty sure that they got dropped from their label after that record.
Yeah, definitely. Um, well, yeah, and that such a weird time when if you watch that Nothing But a Good Time thing on Paramount Plus documentary, some of the bands like they interviewed the guy. I think is it Brian Forsyth, the guy from the band Kicks. Um, Literally says like a week before after like Nevermind comes out, they're shooting a music video for their newest album. Someone from the record company comes in and just shuts down the music video, and not only shuts down the guy's like, "Oh, we're just not going to do the music video." It's like, "No, no, no, we're not doing anything. It's all
Yeah,
over. You can just
yeah,
go."
I believe that. For a band
And
like that, yeah, for sure.
so uh, in those cases, those bands, it was just, I mean, they had no shot, but at least a band like Anthrax, Poison, Warrant were able to put out maybe two, possibly three more records before things got really dire. Um, but like you said, of course, they all came back in the end, and everything's all good now. So they've gone away and come back several times since then. But um, and Kiss is a band too that was never on top of a trend, always followed a trend, and too late at that at any point.
Well, I would say, like, in fairness, like, bands like Ratt and Warrant, I think Poison's a little different. They seem to be able to play venues on their own, but Rat, Warrant, groups like that, Skid Row, they seem to like have to do package tours. Like on their own, I don't think those
No,
bands
no,
can
no,
play big venues anymore. They
no,
they they put like 5 or 6 of them on the same bill, and then they still play a moderate, you know, um, you know, moderate sized venue.
Yeah, I think they definitely all have to do the package tours. Now, speaking of Kiss, now here's another thing too, that you're able to survive the grunge movement if you were a bigger band in the 70s and 80s and before Nirvana. You were able to survive because you were a band that Nirvana thought was cool. So in terms of Kiss, Nirvana always mentioned that they liked Kiss with the makeup and the early stuff, and they were influenced by that. And that kind of always that probably carried Kiss a little bit. And definitely Nirvana always mentioning Black Sabbath, and you had mentioned the Melvins, and they were always into Black Flag and the Bad Brains and Motorhead, and definitely Kurt Cobain being influenced by Iggy Pop, David Bowie, made those guys cool. But I think the greatest thing that Kurt Cobain did, and not the greatest thing for us. I mean, I guess for me, because it did influence me a lot. It did get me into it. I think Paul McCartney owes a lot to Kurt Cobain because all Kurt Cobain talked about in interviews and stuff was the Beatles, and I think that got the Beatles way bigger again, and set the stage for them in the '90s to come back with the anthology and all the stuff that they did. Definitely helped it, and definitely me as a teenager, that was my introduction probably into the Beatles, just because those grunge bands kept talking about them all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kiss. There was definitely that nostalgia for makeup era Kiss. I mean, I think when the grunge bands had a an attitude, it was an attitude about like, I keep on bringing up like Poison. It was an attitude about bands like that. It wasn't Aerosmith, Kiss, Van Halen. Like I think those grunge guys, they listened to that music in the 70s. That's what they were listening to. AC/DC. So I don't think that was, I think their attitude was toward, or at least the people in that scene, if not the musicians themselves, the attitude within that scene was toward Warrant and Kicks and groups like that. Winger, not like the 70s guys.
Yeah. So um now the Nirvana Nevermind is the biggest thing. It surpasses uh I think it's the only band to ever bump Michael Jackson out of like a number one top spot. And because his album Dangerous came out in November of '91, a few months after. And he really could have done anything and it would have been a hit. But it was just cool that a band like Nirvana could knock him down a few pegs, was pretty cool. Um, so now I'm looking 1 year later. So now, and that goes by fast. Would you agree with that? That September of '91 to September of '92 is just like, I lump that all as one. I mean, you could name any of those albums to me, and I would say, yeah, they all came out at the same time. I mean, that was pretty a quick period, because it takes a year after Nevermind for Alice in Chains' Dirt to come out. Um, Stone Temple Pilots' Core comes out exactly a year after. Blind Melon. But then, like I said, you also had these bands that were able to hold on. In 1992, a lot of those bands weren't gone yet. Extreme releases a very critically acclaimed album, Three Sides to Every Story. Skid Row releases the B side Ourselves covers compilation record. Um, and then you have albums coming out in '92, like Temple of the Dog was another one of those big kind of grunge, deals. And then in '92, you have uh, Lollapalooza, the second one, which has Pearl Jam as the headliner, and who else was on that? I can't. I just watched it. No, I can't remember. Oh, Red Hot Chili Peppers. Um, so I guess like a whole big thing is starting, right? So now it's not just so you're kind of into three categories. If you're a teenager, you're 16 years old, you have, and really what started to happen was weird is that like the jocks and stuff would like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and Nirvana, and you know what I mean? Like they started to like that stuff, and it was probably better for them to like that and from a heavy metal guys perspective than liking Color Me Bad and you know, some of that pop crap.
Well, there was an irony though, because like the kids that were into Nirvana and Pearl Jam first weren't the jocks. I mean, they were the kids that the jocks picked on,
Yeah, they
and
didn't
so
want you to like that.
they didn't want, and then there that was a thing that like I think Kurt Cobain struggled with, knowing that like the fucking douchebags that used to beat me up in high school are like the dudes coming to my concerts and like, you know, paying for my, you know, buying my CDs or records. I think, you know, I think that that was something he struggled with, and I know Pearl Jam too I think had commented on that bugged them. It was like a double-edged sword, right, to use a cliche. Like obviously they're enjoying success and are happy people are listening to their music and like it, but at the same time there's a lot of people that like, you know, people that like it that weren't part of their scene that they didn't really want to be associated with.
Um, Now, also going a year, 1992, a year ahead of Nevermind. I wrote down something I thought were interesting here is that albums that came out exactly 1 year before. So, um, in terms of hard rock, heavy metal, you have Queensryche Empire ends up being a huge record. That's kind of like the Black Album of Queensryche. Um, and off the topic, I'll say this that having listening to it again with fresh ears, a song like Silent Lucidity comes a year and a half before the Black Album. Sounds very familiar to songs like The Unforgiven and Nothing Else Matters.
Well, a lot of
Interesting.
bands did that. Like I mean Anthrax did Black Lodge, Testament did that. um what was it? I think what was Testament's version? Was it Legacy? I think that was the name of the song.
Yeah.
They had like a ballad. Megadeth tried to do that. So I think a lot of bands. Oh, by the way, like Black Lodge from Anthrax is fucking that's an awesome song. So I don't mean to say it as a as a diss or anything. That's a great song, but I think a lot of bands were doing that. But I want to point something out and see what you think. You know how you're saying like you're talking about all these different bands, you know, Stone Temple Pilots, and you and I worked at the record store, you know, not long after this period. There was like alternative music got lumped into like a huge category of like a lot of bands that didn't sound like each other. Like the same dude who was buying Pearl Jam was also buying Nine Inch Nails, was also buying Blind Melon, was also buying
It was too vague of a
yeah,
title to say alternative
right.
because yeah, like you would,
Was
when I look at, I go searching now at like resale shops and for used CDs and record stores and antique shops and all this stuff, and you see those bands that they had way more one hit wonders than any hair metal genre did. That they had
yeah,
these bands like Nada Surf or
yeah.
and these ones that were just kind of came and went. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and a lot of them didn't really sound that much alike, but they were. It was just like if you weren't metal, if you weren't hair metal, if you weren't punk, you just got kind of everybody got pushed into this ambiguous category of alternative, whatever that meant.
And like I said, that just kind of sucks. Where it must have been hard for bands like Motley Crue and Anthrax, and these bands were like, no matter what you did, and they didn't know it at the time. No matter what they didn't matter. You could have made the greatest record of your life, and maybe I guess everything comes back around. So I guess it was smart of them in the long run. But I mean, I think the record labels and stuff were like begging them to change their names, and you know what I mean, put out these albums and as a new group, and everybody was getting new singers. And everybody was, um, I mean, a lot of these bands were just imploding on their own, not so much from the record company and stuff. I mean, even the story in the Nothing But a Good Time documentary, um, the guys from Skid Row were saying that they were backstage, and who was it that came? Somebody came backstage. It was a guy from one of these bigger bands, alternative bands at the time. But anyway, he comes in with a bunch of these like demo tapes, that he got from the record labels. He's like, "Oh, here's this band Nirvana," and he plays it for the guys in Skid Row, and they really like it. They're like, "Man, this is cool, man. Like, what indie label are they on? What small label?" He's like, "No, they're on Geffen Records," and that's when they realize, "Oh shit." Like,
Yeah.
if David Geffen is signing Nirvana, that means he's always ahead of the trend, and that's going to be that's going to be the end, or it's going to be a new change, a new wave of something new. Which, by the way, speaking of new wave, this was kind of the second time that was seen, because heavy metal, um, in the early 80s, heavy metal had kind of died and it was over, and new wave was in, and punk was in, and all this stuff, and new romantic music, and Duran Duran, and all this stuff. And then that took a dip for a while, and then that came back, and then heavy metal sort of ushered in hair metal, you know, uh, which is weird because I guess LA was really like the influence on all those bands, right? Where it was like the Sunset Strip, and everybody started to like get glammed out. It was, I mean, to you, wasn't that weird?
Well, I didn't like it.
I mean,
I mean,
like,
I didn't like it.
why did everyone feel that was such a necessity?
Well, the first to do it, I think, was
I guess it
Theater
was
of Pain.
MTV because you wanted to be good looking.
Well,
MTV wouldn't play you unless you're a good looking dude.
Well, Motley Crue was the first, in my opinion, with Theater of Pain. I mean, assuming we're not going to talk about Bowie and New York Dolls and stuff like that. If we're talking about like heavier music, Motley Crue's Theater of Pain was, and the reason why they did that, I think, from what I understand, was they wanted to differentiate themselves, because up until that point, remember, Motley Crue was like they were dressing like Judas Priest with pentagrams, and like they were part of the whole, like, just like, with Sabbath and Ozzy and Maiden, and it was the same fans. We liked everybody. If you were like me and you liked Maiden and Ozzy and Priest, you liked Motley Crue. And Motley Crue, I think, wanted to differentiate themselves from that for whatever reason. And then they went that real glam, like where it was almost like New York Dolls, but like, the New York Dolls, they were cool when they looked like that. Motley Crue, I didn't think was cool that looked like that. And I thought Kiss and Bowie from the 70s, I thought they looked awesome with makeup on, and Alice Cooper, the whole androgynous things. But from a metal kid's perspective, I didn't like that Motley Crue was doing it. And that was around the time where, like, it's okay, so Theater of Pain comes out, and it's like, okay, well, you know what else is out? Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, and I'd rather listen to that shit than
Well, Theater of Pain was not a good album anyway. It was
well, that was right. And then and then Motley Crue actually dropped that image, but everyone else ran with it. Everybody else ran with it. Poison, White Snake,
Ratt,
even older bands like Whitesnake ran with it. All the makeup,
Kiss,
big hair. Yeah, Kiss and
Ozzy,
Ozzy. Yeah, they did. You're right. They did it
Judas
too.
Priest, a little bit.
To a certain extent, yeah.
And yeah, so that's weird. So that you have the A class of hair metal is Motley Crue, Ratt, Poison, whatever. But by the time of, I can understand how Motley Crue and Poison and Ratt, those bands were getting pissed off because the record labels were now signing all this crap that was like underneath them, the D class of stuff, whether it was like these bands they talk about in the Nothing But a Good Time documentary, like these bands like Tuff and Bullet Boys, and Bang Tango, and all this bullshit.
Well, I didn't like that.
I mean, I love hair metal, man. I love it. And those are even, there's albums that I can't even back. I can't get into that. I don't buy Britney Fox. I don't buy Bang Tango. I don't buy.
No, that was a depressing time, because for you and I as kids, watching like Headbangers Ball, I'd have to sit through a Britney Fox
like
and Vixen
10 of those to
and,
get
and
one,
videos
right?
to see like something from Megadeth or somebody that was heavier, Metal Church or somebody like that. If to the extent that they were even showing those videos. Yeah, Tesla was strong. I see in the comments.
Now, are they ones that would you consider them a survivor? I don't know. I mean, I guess.
Yeah, I don't. I think they were a band that unfairly got categorized as part of the hair metal scene when they really weren't. I mean, they were just like hard rock as far as I'm concerned. They didn't wear makeup and shit like that. But if you were around at that time, for whether it was fair or not, you got labeled as like hair metal, and I don't think Tesla sounded like that at all. They were just a hard rock band.
Now I can attest to this more on this level. I know a lot about this stuff. Is that not only was image, the way you dressed and stuff was killed by the grunge movement, but also the instruments you played were lambasted by the grunge movement. No longer did you see like the CC DeVille style, like BC Rich guitar with the Floyd Rose whammy bar, and the guitar was spray painted with like a woman's face on or naked chick on your guitar,
And no huge
all,
drum sets. Get rid of the
and like
huge drum kits.
yeah, and three neck guitar like Steve Vai plays.
Yeah.
Like that
But
was all gone, and not only was it gone, bands like Nirvana and Soundgarden and all those bands went back to their heroes, Tony Iommi and the guys that they liked Joe Perry, the guys in the 70s that played Gibson Les Pauls and Fender Strats exclusively and a Gibson SG, and went back to not only the vintage guitars, but the vintage equipment and fuzz boxes and all that stuff, where the hair metal shit just got way out of control with all the effects and pedals. And I think one guy that fell really victim of that, if you listen from record to record, is Zakk Wylde. When Zakk Wylde first joined Ozzy's band for No Rest for the Wicked, he was using racks and racks of effects and just falling into that trap. And you can hear it on the record where it just doesn't sound that
and
good.
he was glammed out. He was glammed out. He had big hair and makeup and the
Oh
whole
yeah,
thing.
yeah. Baby face shave.
He looked totally different.
Yeah. Totally different. But I don't know. I don't know if that was ever him or not. You know what I mean? Because
Probably
he
not.
quickly turned around and kind of fell back into who he really,
Well, don't
you know,
forget
is
Pantera. I know
now.
people don't like to talk about it, but Pantera was like that before.
Yeah, they
What I
were
mean?
definitely a hair metal band.
Before
That's
they
true.
before Cowboys from Hell, they were glammed out too, just like Dokken or any of those bands. So, and I don't think, just like Zakk Wylde, I don't think that was really them. I think they were trying to get a record deal. Like, this is what you have to look like. And then once they realized they didn't have to, then they were like, okay, well, we can be ourselves now. But I think there were probably some other examples like that too.
Um, yeah, I mean, definitely, and it's weird. Like those stories are, and those stories are crazy. I read all those stories with Joe Perry and Ace Frehley and these guys where in the 70s when they were multimillionaires, they had these guitar collections that, and even Paul Stanley talks about it on his Gibson guitars episode on YouTube. You can check out. It was really good. But all these bands, all these guys had like 1950s Gibson Les Pauls and all these cool guitars. But when Eddie Van Halen came out in the 80s, everyone shifted and we're just playing like those Strat style bodies and like the BC Rich and the Jackson guitars and Kramer guitars. And most of these guys sold those collections for pennies on the dollar. And those guitars are worth millions. Like could be $500,000 today. And you know, that's but you never know those things. And half of those guys sold those, they would have sold them anyway for drugs anyway.
But remember the also the drum kits. I mean, one thing that was really striking to
Yeah,
me
yeah,
is
that ended up getting real cheesy.
well, the one thing that was really striking to me the first time I saw "Smells Like Teen Spirit," the first time I watched that music video, one thing that was really striking to me was how minimalist Dave Grohl's drum
Yeah,
kit
four
was.
four drums. Yeah.
Yeah, which was not like, I mean, we were used to like band, like remember like Cage. Who is it that had the Cage? Was that Slaughter or somebody like
Oh, a
that?
lot of those. Remember the guy from Queensryche? He had that big cage, and he had
Yeah.
a metal chain hanging. The cymbals were
Oh
hanging
yeah,
off metal
yeah,
chains. And then
yeah,
you had like Alex Van Halen had like the 20-piece kit, and then you got the guys that would follow that, like Eric Carr from Kiss. It
yeah,
was just too much. It looked stupid. I mean,
yeah.
it was
And even the bands that I liked, like Slayer, even Dave Lombardo. I mean, his kit wasn't small. It maybe
yeah.
wasn't like, it wasn't as obnoxious as what we're talking about, but it wasn't small.
Yeah, but I didn't have a problem with those guys like a Neil Peart or Dave Lombardo or like Scott Travis from Judas Priest because they utilized the whole kit. It wasn't just for
No,
show
that's a
and
great point.
looks,
That's a
and
fair point. Yeah,
they were actually good musicians and they could work their way around those kits. But a
that's a
lot of those
really
guys
fair
just had
point.
those huge ass drum sets for no reason.
Right, the music didn't really.
Yeah, I
It
remember like
didn't need.
in the Slaughter video. There's a band we didn't mention yet. In the Slaughter videos, remember the guy? He would have like 3 kick drums in the back, like just for no reason. I mean, it was dumb.
It's so stupid. So some of that, it was. I mean, you know, I don't cry any crocodile tears when we talk about grunge killing like hair metal. Like and when we
It
talk
was
about that,
time.
I don't cry any crocodile tears. I mean, I know like someone like Eddie Trunk has a real like attitude about it, but I think some of that deserved to Tommy Lee with the drum kit upside down.
That's a good one.
Some of that deserved to. It was getting really like stupid out of it. So
There's another band too that they're on the chat here that's coming up is Dokken. We didn't talk about, and they're talked about a lot in this Nothing But a Good Time documentary. You should watch it. Um, where I didn't realize, I mean, I guess now it makes sense. I think about, but do you know at that time that Don Dokken was like 15 years older than all the guys in his band and all the guys on the scene at the Sunset Strip? I never realized that. Um, and he was kind of respected as like even before he had a record label in the US with Breaking the Chains stuff. Breaking the Chains was like he had already had record deals in Japan and Sweden and
Germany.
all this stuff. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so that was a pretty cool thing in
No,
there.
I mean, it's all just personal preference. I mean, it is what it is. If you like, Tuff or Kicks or whatever. But I mean,
Oh,
like I mean, I didn't listen to that, but I did like, me. I liked Dokken. I liked Whitesnake, Tesla, like Great White. Like some of that I did like.
I mean,
I mean, I still do.
but every band had at least, yeah, had like one song you could be like, all right, I can tolerate that. That's cool. I mean, I got, you know, here's, I got this in the mail the other
That's a
day.
good record. That's
You know.
that's a good record. The second one they did was good too. I guess it just that it by the time we were teenagers, you listened to more kinds of music. When we were teenagers, I mean, I was pretty orthodox. Like it had to be like, I was
But
listening to like
but here's what's weird though is
Morbid
that
Angel.
what's weird is that in 90, 92, 93, 94, all my friends are way into the grunge scene and listen to all that stuff, but I wasn't done yet. I was like, no, wait a minute. I just got into
Yeah.
I like Kiss and I like Whitesnake. I like
Yeah.
Extreme and I like where's everyone going?
No, I remember that. Yeah, you were more but I think a lot of musicians like you were more like I'll just listen to whatever I like and you don't really care about the trends, but yeah, but I remember that. It was unusual because a lot of the kids your age were really into Pearl Jam and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it was always a good feeling. It was cool to see, like, because remember, there's no internet, there's no YouTube, and so yeah, and like the Guitar Player magazines, when you'd see like like a PV advertisement that had Eddie Van Halen in it with his new like short cropped hair and he had the goatee. I thought that was pretty cool. Like that, oh, cool, man. He's like what? He's a survivor, and he's can still get in the magazines. Or like when Ace Frehley's in the Guitar Player magazine because he's with Dimebag Darrell. And Dimebag Darrell's like
Yeah, that was cool. I remember that.
giving him his props.
Well,
So
those bands co-signing those bands really helped, especially Kiss, Motorhead, Black Sabbath, those bands like Pantera, Guns N' Roses, Nirvana, Metallica, like giving them shout outs really, I think, helped either, if not resuscitate, at least keep those bands relevant.
And then it was weird at the time too. Remember, like, and then it got to the point where, like Guns N' Roses and Nirvana would like want to fight each other, and like Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses want to fight
Yeah,
each other. Like they would go on MTV News and talk about like how they want to get in a boxing ring and fight. It's dumb.
yeah, that was
That's
I
all the
think
shit that Nirvana hated. But like Nirvana, like they kind of fed into it a little because they were sarcastic kind of little shits. You know what I mean?
I
So
think they were making
they
fun of
could
it
get under the
more.
skin. Yeah, yeah.
I think it was Axel and was it Vince Neil or Tommy Lee Axel? One of them they were gonna fight or threatening. But you know, Guns N' Roses, a lot of people didn't like them. Even Metallica didn't like. I mean, they may have liked their music, but well, I shouldn't say Guns N' Roses. I should say Axl, because I think
Yeah,
everyone
they
got
liked
along
all
with
the other
Slash.
guys. Yeah,
I think
yeah.
everyone liked Slash and Duff
No,
and the
everybody
other
loved
guys.
Duff, and yeah.
I think it was Axl that people didn't like. But
Well, yeah,
I
even
just
the
saw in the
guys in his own
comments.
band ended up not liking.
Right, right. I saw in the comments somebody shouting out Scorpions. You and I were just texting about them the other night. I'm a big Scorpions fan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's another band that I think maybe they were smart enough to just kind of lay low, while that was going on. I think, well, they came out with the album, was it Alien Nation? Uh, that was a
They
big
had,
radio hit at the time
yeah,
when
they
grunge
had,
was out.
they still had, and the Scorpions. I mean, they were a band. I mean, they were always headlining major venues. I mean, I never remember them ever having to play clubs. I mean, you look at some of the other bands, even a band that I cherish, one of my favorite bands of all time, Iron Maiden. When Blaze Bayley was the singer, they were playing fucking harpos, man. They were playing clubs. Slayer was playing clubs during the mid '90s. A lot of these bands that I love, Judas Priest. I don't. I think Judas Priest was still playing larger venues, but some of these bands, even the heavier ones, fell on hard times. But I think Scorpions, Alice Cooper, there's some OGs that I think really held out and were always playing like larger venues, even at the heart of like grunge.
Do you think grunge had to do with anything to do with? I don't know the timeline. I'd have to go back and look, but does grunge have anything to do with Rob Halford and Bruce Dickinson saying, you know what, I should probably jump ship and go do my own thing and start a new band because I see where this is headed?
Well, I think so. I mean, to a certain extent, I think it was. I think they were frustrated with the lack of like doing, just doing the same record over and over again. I mean, if you look at like Fight, I've been going through this Rob Halford phase
And
because
I thought Fight was cool because
I do too.
Rob
I
Halford
really
like
like them.
completely changed his image.
Well, I was
Like
just
he
gonna
didn't wear
say
he stopped wearing leather. Like he just
he
wore like jeans and a shirt.
he looked and
He
he
would wear
looked
like
like a younger dude.
he'd wear like a backwards like LA Raiders hat or something. You know what I
He
mean?
he, he
It
looked like a
was
normal
cool.
dude. He was, and I think so. That was part of the aesthetic of like that grunge was like. Which by the way, aesthetically, that's one thing that you'll hear someone like Paul Stanley. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like the idea of like you're just a guy with jeans and a t-shirt getting on stage and plugging in. Yeah,
Yeah.
he doesn't like that. But that was sort of like that punk aesthetic was like,
Strip
you're
it
not gonna
down. Things
strip
have
it
gone too
down.
far. We got to bring it back a little
Yeah,
bit.
so with Rob Halford and Fight, I mean, the musically it was still straight up heavy metal, but yeah, they had a really stripped down look. Basically just jeans and t-shirts and baseball caps, which was just kind of like looked like any regular thrash band at the time.
And I guess that's why I never got like if you go back and watch the video for Motley Crue Hooligans Holiday, I mean it had everything in there for it to be like a hit and for it to like not be affected by grunge, but I don't know, just something I don't know what happened that they couldn't. I guess it was still they weren't glam looking, but they still I don't know, there was still some aesthetic about their look that wasn't what Fight was and Rob Halford. It was still really sort of glamorous looking, but you know what I mean? Like how like Guns N' Roses at the end was like really glamorous looking, where like it almost became like a uniform. Like Axl Rose would have like that. What is that? Like that army kind of like Michael Jackson would wear like that. What is that? Like a military style,
Yeah, like
get
right,
up
like
or something. Or he
1800s
would have
like
like he would have like the spandex with the what do you wear? What do you wear like a bulletproof vest or something? And,
it was weird.
he'd wear like catcher, like baseball catcher knee pads. And shit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, that reminds you of like Alice Cooper, like the Sex Pistols. I mean, there's something, yeah, Michael Schenker. Yeah, yeah. Speaking of Scorpions, UFO. I don't really know what UFO was doing in the '90s, but I like their '70s stuff
Okay.
uh, and their early '80s stuff.
Yeah, I listened to this yesterday.
Oh yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
MSG Macaulay
Right,
Schenker group
right.
got a couple
Um,
good songs on it.
I don't remember like Hooligans Holiday, Motley Crue. Honestly, I don't remember what they looked like in that video. I don't remember. I thought they were wearing all like black leather or something like that. But I don't remember.
No, I mean, it was real, like, they, like Tommy Lee and Nikki Sixx always tried to look cool and be on the cutting edge or whatever, like fashion wise was cool looking. But I just think that Motley Crue trying to look street was still never going to work because they were millionaire rock stars. And the grunge movement, people could just see right through that, and it wasn't going to happen no matter what they
But
did.
even that tour, I mean, you can look it up. I mean, I believe that tour, I believe Motley Crue was still headlining major venues. I don't think they took a dip. I mean, I don't like they
Well,
unless they were playing theaters, maybe like,
at the
but
beginning of the tour,
they headlined Pine Knob. I remember that.
yeah, but that still wasn't in arenas. And then by the end of the cycle of that tour, uh, Nikki Sixx went on, and this is in the dirt, the book where Nikki Sixx went on the radio. Uh, One of the last shows of the tour in Phoenix, Arizona, went on the radio rock station that morning and said, "Anyone that wants to come down to the show tonight, I will get you backstage. Just come and see me. Mention that you heard me on the radio, and we'll get you backstage." 2 people showed up to the backstage door that
Whoa.
night, and he
Whoa.
said, "That's when I knew it's over."
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then you
Well,
have in the Nothing But a Good Time documentary also too, they interview Steve Brown from the band Trixter, and he was saying how, and I saw this show that when they were in 1992, so November of 1992 is a year after Nirvana Nevermind comes out. So a lot of grunge is going up, but also it's not just grunge that's hurting bands like Trixter and Kiss. It's Metallica, it's Megadeth, it's Slayer. It's those bands too that Pantera, kids are getting into that real harder stuff, and they're kind of shying away from those bands. But what Steve Brown said of Trixter in the documentary is that, by the end of that Kiss tour they were on, it was Great White, Trixter, and Kiss. By the end of that tour, in an arena was probably only 1,000 people. So
wow.
he said that
Wow.
each tier, the main floor and each tier of the arena would only be 4 rows deep anywhere you look. So
Wow.
that's pretty
So
scary, man.
yeah, I'm saying these bands are playing major venues, but I didn't take into account like that doesn't mean they were selling any tickets in these major
Yeah, just because you
venues.
can't, yeah, just because you can go into an arena doesn't mean you're going to
Right.
sell it out or have any kind of.
Well, also I think I remember thinking about this in real time on like Kiss the Revenge tour, Ozzy, No Rest for the Wicked, or I guess probably No More Tears
Well,
would
yeah,
be a
remember
better
that,
example.
but like I said with Ozzy, he had to climb the mountain again because he had really fallen with No Rest for the Wicked. That even you saw him, he had to play theaters. He was for a long time he couldn't get back into an arena.
For No More Tears, yeah, I saw him at the Fox Theater. But I would say that before that, though, I remember thinking this in real time that Kiss and Ozzy like were already like behind the times by picking those kinds of opening bands. Ozzy and Kiss having like Faster Pussycat and Slaughter and Great White and Trixter opening up for them. I remember thinking like you're already looking like dated because of Nirvana and shit like that. Now, by the time I saw Ozzy and No More Tears, Prong was opening up, and so you could tell that Ozzy had got the memo at that point because Prong was. They were definitely metal and they were heavy, but they had a kind of alternative, like kind of quality to them. And so, but the tour before that in the summer, I think it was like Faster Pussycat, Slaughter, and you could already tell they were like behind the times.
Do you think those bands? I guess they were probably happy that they could be called alternative instead of metal. I guess if you have like Prong, Helmet, um, some of those
Hel-
bands that were
Helmet was
Faith No
awesome.
More.
Oh
Faith No
God,
More was heavy.
one of the best. Yeah.
So I guess that worked out for them that you know, they straddled the fence of metal. I mean, I don't know, but I guess it was
Well, I
good
I
for
think
them.
so. I mean, for a guy like me, I mean, Faith No More, Helmet, Alice in Chains, those three bands in particular, I didn't skip a beat. Like I didn't think like, oh, this is alternative. It was just like this is fucking good. It was heavy. I could tell it was a little bit different. I mean, I remember like a band that I really thought was different, but I was like really I really was like, this is fucking awesome. It's heavy, but it's different. And you and I saw them in San Diego is Quicksand. I remember being in high school and seeing Quicksand video on it was either 120 minutes or Headbangers Ball, I can't remember. And I was like, wow, like, it was like post-hardcore. And but I really was like, this is pretty rad. But I didn't think of it as like, oh, so now I can't listen to Iron Maiden because I'm listening to some other kind of scene.
Well, even Iron Maiden at the time Quicksand's coming out, even Iron Maiden, like I said, Rob Halford and Bruce Dickinson are smart to jump ship because like instantaneously Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, they lose their record deals
Oh
and
yeah.
now they're on like CMC records, they're on some dopey label. Um, but even all those bands, whether it was Vince Neil coming back to Motley Crue or Kiss reuniting, that everyone kind of saw that it was always the original lineup that people wanted, and maybe that was kind of the thing that could like fix the problems, that a lot of these bands were having. Just bring back the classic lineup, and everything will be forgotten. Everything's okay again.
Well, I think you're onto something though with like Kiss, like all those bands, whether it's Nine Inch Nails. I mean, Trent Reznor, I think even way more so than Nirvana was a Kiss fan, and like and Pantera, they were like huge Kiss fans. I think that like gave a lot of street cred to like the Kiss reunion thing because would Kiss have been able to pull off that reunion if Nirvana, Nine Inch Nails, and Pantera are out there saying, "Oh, Kiss sucked. I never liked Kiss. They were they were shitty." Like I don't think it would have had. I think the fact that those three bands in particular were like, shouting out Kiss. I think Pearl Jam were Kiss fans too. Um, that I think that gave some like street cred to the idea of there could be the nostalgia for a Kiss reunion, but also some of these like newer fans are listening. Their bands are telling them, "Hey, check the original Kiss out. Like it was fucking awesome."
Yeah, yeah. So now talking back to that though, like Lollapalooza and that time. So you're in high school and like are there groups of people or do you even know anybody that says like, hey, I really love Jane's Addiction. I I love those bands that are on the Lollapalooza bill. I love Susie and the Banshees. I love all that, like The
Yeah, I think so.
Cure
I
and
mean, I like. Yeah, I mean, I really like Susie and the Banshees still, but yeah, I mean, they were like I mean, I'm a weird situation because the guys that I ran with didn't like rock music at all. They just listened to that fucking whack shit you were talking about, like Marky Mark and
what was ever on the
and
rate? Yeah, pop
hip
MTV.
hop
Yeah,
and the fucking Belle Biv DeVoe and shit like that. So
yeah.
I was sort of the only one in my group that was like a rock and roll dude.
Well,
So, but I knew that.
what was the first time you remember? Like, did somebody come up to you, or did somebody be like, this band Nine Inch Nails, but like the guy uses drum machines and it's this thing called industrial. I don't even know if that was even a name for it back then. What the fuck was it? I mean, what
Well, it was
you,
two things. I mean,
who liked that at the time?
no, there were kids. I mean, there were kids at the school that were like the band kids and stuff. They were into Smashing Pumpkins and like they were cutting edge. They were into a lot of this stuff before it became mainstream. But and then also like they were starting to play that stuff on MTV, like even on whether it was Headbangers Ball or whatever that alternative. There was that alternative. I can't remember. Was it 120 minutes? But there may have been another one too. But I mean, I remember, hearing about these bands, either like seeing kids having their T-shirts on, or seeing them on MTV, or even in some of the rock magazines would like slowly.
Well,
Well,
Rolling
I should say,
Stone, I'm sure. Yeah.
well, they for sure, but I should say metal magazines. Even some of the metal magazines would start to mention some of these groups. Maybe not like Blind Melon, but like Nine Inch Nails. I mean, if you're a metal dude, that's not that much of a departure, you know.
Yeah, when you watch the Lollapalooza documentary on Paramount Plus, for me when I watched it, it was really cool to see. I mean, you forget, I don't know, you forget just because you move on from it and it was something you liked as a kid and maybe it was a little childish or whatever. But like at that time in 1991, at the height of his, I mean, no one else would have done this, but at the height of his fame as a rap artist, Ice-T forms this hardcore punk metal band, Bodycount, and it was just so cool. Like when you watch the footage now, I was like, man, holy shit! Like
That's a
that
good
guy was
record.
that guy was really ahead of his time on that stuff. I mean, I'm sure the record label probably tried to talk him out of that a million times. Like, what the hell are you do? What are you doing? What do you want to do? This is stupid.
Well, I think I think first of all he was, he's a genuine like fan of rock music, but I think he recognized, and someone earlier mentioned the Anthrax Public Enemy collaboration. I think Ice-T was someone who was a pioneer in that he recognized that there are a lot of kids like in my age bracket, your age bracket, who listen to heavy rock music, but also listen to Ice-T and NWA and Public Enemy, and the audiences weren't segmented like they used to be. Like I think he recognized that like actually a lot of rock kids listen to hip hop, and he was able to cross over as a result.
Yeah, there was a list I found that it's a real old. Actually, you can see it online. It's on a written piece of paper that's now all like screwed up. You can barely read it now, but it's Kurt Cobain made a list of his top like I don't know if it was top 100 albums of all time or 200 albums of all time. And Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions
Oh
is
yeah,
on that list by
the
Kurt
best.
Cobain. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean that
that
is
is
sort
one
of
of
a
the
rock.
best
I
records of
consider
all
that like a
time.
rock and roll record
Uh, Rick Rubin, right?
because it's like anger. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
I mean
the
it's
attitude.
definitely, yeah, for sure. I mean,
And guys like guys like in Guns N' Roses and these bands, they would wear those Public Enemy shirts, and so yeah,
NWA.
that was cool.
So,
Um,
but speaking of alternative and industrial, I mean, don't forget, and I think was it 91 or 92, Ministry's Psalm 69 comes out, and that
oh
was
yeah, and
fucking heavy,
they play
man.
Lollapalooza too, right? So
Yeah,
they're I
yeah,
don't know if they're on the first year or the second year, and then yeah, that song comes out and probably helps a band like Nine Inch Nails, right? Because that song was probably bigger than anything Nine
yeah. I
Inch
mean,
Nails had up to that point.
yeah, Ministry. I mean that was again a band that could bridge gaps because whatever this so-called alternative scene, but also like metal dudes like me could listen to that and be like, wow, this is really heavy. It doesn't sound like Exodus, but it's still heavy in its own way.
And then that kind of brings in Ministry, then brings in like White Zombie, right? And then it kind of
Yeah,
goes from
yeah,
there.
yeah. They
Um,
were they were definitely a band that was like mostly metal, but a lot of like alternative kids like them. You know, I think there. Don't forget there were a lot of like alternative kids who might be into Nirvana, White Zombie, Ministry, but they weren't listening to Iron Maiden and shit like that. You know what I mean? It went in like one direction. Like if you were already listening to Iron Maiden and then you're like, oh, okay, White Zombie, this is kind of cool. Ministry, this is kind of cool. But if your first point of departure is Nine Inch Nails, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, or whatever, you weren't picking up crazy nights and then or, you know what I mean?
unless you were
Or
me.
seventh son of a seventh son, and like
Yeah,
you know what I
right,
mean.
right.
You weren't backtracking. Like you were just starting off with this is what I like, and it was more of those of us who grew up with rock from the 70s and 80s that already listened to heavy music, and then we branched off into different Quicksand, Helmet, whatever. But if you first started off, you know 13, 14 years old, and the first rock music you ever like is Nirvana, you
Yeah.
weren't going to buy No More Tears from
Well, yeah.
Ozzy or
And then think about that too. And that happens. So the guys that are generation older than we are, those bands, those guys loved in the '70s, loved the Rolling Stones, and you know, I don't know, Pink Floyd, stuff like that. And then what happens in the '80s is that from what stories I hear is that a lot of those guys that loved those bands had to stop listening to those bands because the music got pretty lame. And that just shows you that bands had that struggle. A lot of 70s bands struggled with making it in the 80s. A lot of the 80s bands struggled to keep it going in the 90s. You know, and that seems to always happen where a handful of bands can transcend decades, but a lot of them can't.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all relative. I mean, I know, like in the mid to late '90s, I had really lost interest in some of those bands that I grew up listening to, like Death Angel, Flotsam and Jetsam. Like, I admit I started to lose interest in them. I always loved Slayer and some of like the blue chip bands, but I started to lose interest in Sacred Reich and Sabotage and bands like that because
Well,
like
because
there
it
was
kind of all sound the same,
it
right?
started to sound the same, and and these bands like Quicksand, Helmet, Faith No More, then eventually Deftones. It was more interesting. It was more. It was more hip. It was more interesting. Now, then when I got older, of course, or as I've gotten older, now of course I fucking listen to Metal Church and all that shit all the time because now I just don't give a shit. I just listen to whatever I feel like it. But I remember being in my 20s, like let's say like 1996. I was sort of bored with those like I said, Death Angel, Flotsam and Jetsam, Metal Church, bands like that. I would even say like bands like Testament and Megadeth and bands like that. I had lost interest in. I always liked the '70s stuff, Sabbath, Kiss, always liked that no matter what. But um, there's ebbs and flows. I guess I'm just rambling, but you know.
Um, so like you mentioned earlier when we started, so we'll end off on this. So I'll give you give me 1 to 10, 10 being, the best, 1 being the worst. But we're gonna do it twofold. So if I'm gonna mention an album and then you tell me because like you said, you gain more respect as you get older for some of these records than you did at the time. So I'm interested to see what your ranking is, the 16-year-old you versus the you are today. So let's start with the one we've been talking about, and the whole spark this conversation is Nirvana Nevermind. Let's just give it a year. Let's say you're 17 years old. You're a junior, senior in high school. 1 to 10, what do you give that record?
Oh, back then,
At the
probably
time.
probably like a 3.
Yeah.
That wasn't it wasn't heavy enough for me. Now I would say like an 8, you
Yeah,
know.
okay. Yeah, that's
I'm
what
I'm not
shows
I'm
you,
not
right?
I'm not going to say more than that just because that's politically correct because I like that record a lot now and I listen to Nirvana a lot more now than I did back then. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, I would still rather listen to Judas Priest than listen to Nirvana. I'm not going to pretend
Yeah.
otherwise. But I do recognize it's a great album. It's a pioneering album, and I like it a lot. I think the songs are great. I would say 8 out of 10.
Now I wonder if this on the other edge of the spectrum does this switch where 1 is higher, 1 is lower? What is the 17-year-old you rank Ozzy's No More Tears compared to what you would rank it today?
Oh yeah, that's a reverse.
Right, that's what I'm
because
thinking.
because I liked that record when it came out. I never listened to. I think that record sucks.
But what did you like
No.
about it? When it first came
Uh,
out, did you like because it was a return to form, it had a lot of heavy songs,
I thought No More Tears was
Hellraiser,
was good. Yeah, hell,
Desire, there's a lot of good stuff on it.
and
I love it.
I was just such an Ozzy fan that I pretty much liked
He could
anything
have
that
done anything.
he could have done anything. But excuse me. But as I've gotten older, I realize I fucking hate those country songs on there. Like Mom, I'm coming home time after time. I hate those songs.
Road
Road
to
to Nowhere.
Nowhere.
I hate those songs. I even No More Tears. I could if I never hear it again, I'd be okay with it. Like so when that first came out, I bought it the day it came out. That was another record I was looking forward to coming out. At the time, I probably would have given it like a 6 out of 10. Like because I knew it wasn't as heavy as Diary of a Madman. Like even in real time, I
You knew what
recognized like
where he was going,
yeah,
right?
this was I wasn't I in real time I knew this wasn't my favorite Ozzy record, but I still liked it a lot. So I would say probably 6 out of 10, and now I would say like a 2 out of 10. That's one of my least favorite Ozzy records.
Um, and then the same goes. You mentioned buying Metallica Black Album the day that it comes out. Um, how many songs had you? Because remember, it's pre-internet, no YouTube, no website to go to. How many songs had you actually heard? Was it only Enter Sandman. When you got in the car that day, then you bought the album. You had not heard any of the songs other than that one.
Just Enter Sandman had been out for a while.
So you
Yeah.
and your buddy, you go, you stay in line, you get the album, you go, you pop it in the car, and this is literally the first time you're ever hearing "Sad But True," "The Unforgiven," "Holier Than Thou," "Nothing Else Matters."
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was different, and it was
Now, what? No, now, do you know? You mean you know it's different before you put it in and listen to it, or you don't know what you're you don't
I mean,
you
I
don't know
knew
what to
that
expect then? You
even
think you're getting "And Justice for All" again?
well, I mean, I knew Enter Sandman was already different. I had already like, but I didn't know the record was going to sound like that. But um, I was definitely um like surprised, I guess is the right word. I was definitely surprised that the whole record really sounded like Enter Sandman. It wasn't just like a one-off track. Um, but I thought it was cool that they went into a different direction. And then I got caught up just like everyone else did. Those songs were on the radio all the time. And like, I mean, I used to listen to that record all the time back then. And
And that's, I don't think it's not just that, but it's also the people that are now saying they like it is turning you off as well, right?
well, then, yeah, eventually I turned on the record because right, they became so big. And then, all these people are listening to that record that really never listened to Ride the Lightning or anything like that. And then they played those songs so much on the radio that I got sick of them. So I would say that the day it came out, I probably would give it like probably a 6 out of 10. And then, by the late 90s, I'd give it like a 1 out of 10. I couldn't stand that record. And then now I would say back to a 6 out of 10. It's about where I originally like. I don't love it, but I like it.
Yeah. There
Should
we
you
go.
should
I
let
think
A-Pops give a rating for
he did hang out all night. So I got to give you that.
for
That's awesome. And wow, what a contributor. Lots of cool
what
chat. I mean, brought up a lot
what's
of
the
cool
rating
bands.
for
I give him a 10. Now, but back to the
I know,
subject.
what's his rating? What's his
Oh yeah,
I'd be
yeah.
curious
What's
to
your
see what
rating
other
for Ratt?
people think. Oh, 0 out
Because
of
we're only got about a couple minutes left here. But again, so Black Album, is your rating higher today than it was then, or it's gotten
it's a
worse for
I
you?
would no, I would say it's the same. It was just above average, then it went really down. Now I'm back to just above average with it.
And then what about the Use Your Illusion albums? So
Oh,
those come out a little bit after the Black Album. Do you have just have, but I mean, you're a heavy rock fan. Why do you have no interest? Why is there no interest?
they
Do you
just
think
weren't
because they had
heavy
already
enough.
reached the mainstream status already with Appetite for Destruction, so they were already big and mainstream with girls that you were going to high school with and jocks and guys. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know if that really mattered to me. I just didn't like their music. I mean,
yeah. So yeah, if Use Your Illusion came out and it was super heavy, you would have been into it then.
yeah, I mean, like I think the "Don't You Cry" the version they never play on the radio that's a cool song. "Civil War" is a heavier song.
That is good.
But I just don't. Even the first record I don't love. Well,
I know people get so mad, and
"Appetite for Destruction." I don't.
you get
I
so
mean, I
mad.
like some of those songs. "My Michelle," like there's some decent songs, but I don't know. I never
I
really
mean,
liked that band.
and if you watch that Nothing But a Good Time thing, I mean, the praise that it gets, and people saying like, "Oh my god, top to bottom, every song is a 10 on that." I mean, what? I mean, am I getting something wrong here? I don't know.
I mean, I could tell that they were interesting. I mean, I could tell like if you that they were more interesting than like the hair metal bands. You could tell right away that they had a different sound. You
Yeah,
know,
but were they that much different than the Cult or the bands that were
well, see,
already out doing some
I
of that
really
shit?
the cult. I liked the Cult a lot, which GNR opened up for the Cult. When they first came out, but I could see why, I could understand why people like them a lot. Like I didn't like diss them or make fun of them. I understood why they were so popular. It just
No,
didn't
it was
speak to me.
needed. It was necessary and it was
I just didn't
needed.
like, yeah, I just didn't like
Yeah.
it. It wasn't that I hated it or anything. I just didn't speak to me.
Um,
So I would say the same. I mean, I'd give it like a 2 out of 10 then and a 2 out of 10 now. I just
well,
don't
a lot of
like
people
it.
say with the Use Your Illusion records that if they would have condensed it down to one, probably would have been a better. And I think they did end up doing that. I think there was a point where I think you could just buy one CD that had like
Yeah, it
the
sounds
best
familiar, but
tracks or
I don't remember for sure.
something. So alrighty, well, I think we got everything squared away here. We mentioned a lot of bands on this thing tonight. Just a recap of who we talked about tonight. We talked about Nirvana. We talked about Pearl Jam. We talked about Van
Mookie
Halen.
Mookie Blaylock.
We talked about Pearl Jam. We talked about Marky Mark. We talked about Color Me Bad. We talked about Motley Crue. We talked about Ozzy. We talked about Warrant, Judas Priest, Megadeth. We talked about Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains, Blind Melon, Temple of the Dog. I mean, Jesus Christ, Kiss. We mentioned a million bands on this thing. So if you're just tuning in now, go back to the beginning when you get time. Tomorrow or tonight and go back and listen again because there's a lot of bands we mentioned. I mean, we got a ton of people we talked about tonight. So, well, there you have it. Thanks for joining me. It was fun. I always love doing it. I could sit here and talk for 3 more hours. So, but my family's gonna get mad at me, and my dog's gonna get mad that I haven't fed him yet, or I gotta take care of the dog. God's sake, I'm sitting down here in this dungeon. I'm sitting down here in this concrete room. And
Yeah,
you're doing the same thing.
the rubber room. Yeah,
You're
for
doing the
crazy
same
people. Yeah.
All right. Well, cool, man. Well, all right. Well, thank you. And we got a schedule to do this. Well, I don't know what the next topic's going to be, but I'll come up with something cool. I try to keep them as vague. I thought this one would be like something vague as possible that we could talk about like a million different bands in one sort of topic.
We should talk
So
about do a show on all the concerts we've gone to together.
yeah, that would be awesome. Or even like I love the subject of like uh, bands that when they change singers or change like
Oh yeah,
important
yeah.
band members.
Yeah, I love talking about
Did they
that.
survive or did they die or did it start a whole new chapter
What
or I
about
love talking about
concerts
that.
that we can't remember because we were alcoholics and
Well,
concerts we've
well,
watched that were sober?
well, for me, that's 85%. So I don't know.
Well,
I mean, I
me
really have
too.
to think.
I went
No,
to see
it would
Judas
really
Priest
take
the
the
other
two
night. It
of
was
us.
great to see him sober, to see them
Yeah,
like to remember all the set list and everything. It's a lot more fun now, I would say.
it would definitely take both of us to write the list. And then we would still probably forget a few. It would, what I mean, like a few days you
Oh
go like,
yeah,
oh, I forgot about that one. We got to add
sure.
that.
It's too many.
Maybe I'll start like a Google Doc or something that we can both add them.
Yeah, a lot of
So
shows.
there's a master document, and yeah, that we'll do an episode about that. That's a good idea. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and this will be cut up into little sections, and I'll be posting those on my YouTube channel. Again, thanks everybody. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, get notified so when I put up new videos. I got tons of vinyl always to show. I'm always buying new stuff and new equipment and new stuff to test out and tips and tricks and all that stuff. So I'll see you guys next time, and we'll see you later. Bye.